A housekeeper was dragged down a polished hallway for saving a battered dog, her cries swallowed by chandeliers, silk dresses, and wealth. A powerful family believed their walls could hide cruelty. They thought money would silence the truth, that no one would dare intervene. But they forgot one thing. Her brother is a Navy SEAL, and faith sharpens his eyes. When injustice went too far, God moved quietly, and the truth prepared to speak. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. A cold rain brushed the city that morning, turning the sky the color of dull steel and pressing a quiet weight over the estate on the hill. The mansion belonged to the Whitmore family, old money wrapped in glass, marble, and silence. Inside, the floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting chandeliers and the careful footsteps of people trained to never be seen. Sarah Carter moved through those halls the way she always did, quietly, steadily, carrying a linen cart that rattled softly with folded sheets. She was 46, tall and slim, with a strength that came not from gyms, but from years of standing back up. Her dark brown hair was always tied low at the nape of her neck, practical and neat. Her skin carried the warm tone of someone who had once worked outdoors and now worked indoors pretending not to exist. Sarah had kind eyes, the kind that noticed things others ignored, and a calm that had been carved by loss rather than comfort. She had not planned to become a housekeeper in a billionaire's home. Life had simply narrowed around her until this was the door left open. That morning, as she wiped fingerprints from a long hallway wall, she heard a sound that did not belong in a house like this. A sharp, broken yelp, cut off too quickly. Sarah froze. The sound came again, weaker this time, from behind a decorative screen near the east corridor. She hesitated only a second before moving. Behind the screen, half hidden by velvet drapes, crouched a young golden retriever, no more than a year old. His fur was matted, one ear nicked, his ribs visible beneath skin stretched too tight. A crystal paperweight lay nearby, smeared with something dark. Standing over him was Lily Whitmore, the family's only daughter. Lily was 20, beautiful in the way money teaches, long blonde hair styled to look effortless, flawless skin, and eyes sharp with boredom. She wore a silk dress and heels that clicked like punctuation marks. "Don't touch it," Lily snapped when she saw Sarah. Her voice carried the careless cruelty of someone who had never been told no. "It's just a stupid dog. It bit me." The dog whimpered, trying to crawl backward. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She stepped between Lily and the animal without thinking, her hands open, her body angled protectively. "He's hurt," she said softly. "He needs help." Lily laughed, short and bright. "You don't get to tell me what needs anything. You're staff." Sarah felt something old stir in her chest, fear mixed with anger, tempered by years of swallowing both. She knelt anyway, ignoring Lily's stare, and gently pressed her apron against the dog's bleeding ear. The dog licked her wrist weakly, tail twitching once as if remembering what kindness felt like. That was when Lily smiled. The rest happened fast. Too fast for dignity, too fast for witnesses. Security cameras hummed quietly as Lily stepped forward, grabbed a fistful of Sarah's hair, and yanked. Sarah's knees hit the marble hard, the shock knocking the air from her lungs. Lily dragged her down the hallway, heels scraping, silk whispering, Sarah's palms burning as she tried to brace herself. The dog barked once, sharp and desperate, before retreating under a console table. "You think you're a hero?" Lily hissed, bending close. "You're nothing. You clean up messes. That's all you're good for." Sarah tasted blood. She did not scream. She did not beg. She focused instead on breathing, on the dog's terrified eyes, on not letting this moment define her. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood ajar, the study of Richard Whitmore, Lily's father. A shadow moved behind frosted glass. The door did not open. When Lily finally let go, strands of Sarah's hair were left behind on the marble like discarded thread. Lily smoothed her dress, composed again. "Clean yourself up," she said lightly, "and get rid of that dog before it stains something." She walked away. Later, in a small storage room behind the kitchen, Sarah rinsed her scraped hands in cold water. Her reflection in the metal sink looked older than it had that morning. She wrapped the dog in towels and sat with him on the floor, whispering nonsense words the way she once had to her son when he was afraid of storms. The dog trembled but did not pull away. She named him quietly in her head. Lucky, because he had survived this far. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a missed call from her younger brother. Michael Carter was 40, a former Navy SEAL with a face shaped by discipline and consequence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair cut short and already threaded with gray at the temples. A close-trimmed beard framed a jaw that rarely softened. Michael had learned long ago to keep his emotions folded tight, the way soldiers do when feelings become liabilities. The death of their parents, and later the war, had taught him that control was survival. Sarah stared at the phone, then typed a message she erased 3 times before sending only this: "I'm okay. Please don't worry." She did not mention the hair on the floor. She did not mention the dog. She did not mention the cameras. Across the state, Michael sat alone at a kitchen table, rain tapping against the window. His phone lit up again, this time with a photo sent from an unknown number. The image was blurred, poorly framed. Marble floor, a smear of blood, a lock of dark hair twisted like rope. Michael stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. The message beneath the photo contained only 4 words. "Tell her to behave." Michael's face hardened, something dangerous and deliberate settling behind his eyes. He picked up his keys, then stopped, staring at the screen as if it might explain itself. Outside, the rain intensified, washing the city in silver. Inside the Whitmore estate, Sarah held the injured dog closer as footsteps echoed in the hallway again, heavier this time, approaching the door. She did not know yet who was coming. She only knew the silence had shifted. Michael Carter arrived at dawn, when the city still pretended nothing ugly had happened the night before. He parked his truck 2 streets away from the Whitmore estate, not out of fear, but habit. 40 years had taught him that visibility was a liability. He stood for a moment in the drizzle, rain beading on his jacket, letting the house on the hill settle into his mind the way he once studied hostile terrain. Glass, marble, security lights, trimmed hedges like disciplined soldiers. Beautiful, controlled, and rotten in the places that thought no one was looking. Michael was tall, broad through the shoulders, the kind of man whose stillness carried weight. His hair was cut short in the way that never quite leaves you after the military, dark with gray threading at the temples. A trimmed beard framed a face marked by angles rather than softness, cheekbones sharp, eyes steady and pale, the color of steel left out in weather too long. He spoke little to strangers, not because he lacked words, but because he'd learned silence made people reveal themselves faster. The war had not made him cruel. It had made him precise. Inside the estate, Sarah moved as if the night had never happened. She had slept in snatches, waking every hour to check on the dog curled beside her mattress. Lucky's golden coat was dulled with dirt, his breathing shallow but steady. He was young, barely past puppyhood, with oversized paws and eyes too gentle for the hands that had hurt him. When Sarah brushed his fur, he leaned into her touch with desperate trust, as if afraid kindness might disappear if he blinked. Sarah dressed carefully that morning. She chose a long-sleeved uniform to hide the bruises blooming along her arms, tied her dark hair low again, though the scalp beneath still ached where strands had been torn free. Her face in the mirror was composed, but the woman looking back carried a deeper quiet than before, the kind that comes after something breaks, and you realize it will never fit together the same way again. She had just finished cleaning the breakfast room when Mrs. Ellison appeared in the doorway. Margaret Ellison was the head housekeeper, a woman in her late 50s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and a posture stiffened by decades of holding other people's secrets. She had once been kind, or perhaps Sarah had simply wanted to believe she was. This morning, her mouth was a thin line. "Mr. Whitmore wants to see you," Mrs. Ellison said. Her eyes flicked briefly to Sarah's covered arms, then away. "Now!" The study smelled of old books and expensive leather. Richard Whitmore sat behind his desk, immaculate in a tailored suit, silver hair combed back, his face calm in the way of men who believed consequences were for other people. He gestured for Sarah to stand, not sit. "My daughter tells me you interfered yesterday," he said mildly, fingers steepled, "and that you created a scene." Sarah kept her gaze level. "I stopped an animal from being hurt." Whitmore sighed, as if inconvenienced. "This is a private home. You overstepped. Lily has been very upset." Sarah thought of the dog's bleeding ear, of the marble cold against her cheek. She said nothing. "You'll stay out of Lily's way," Whitmore continued. "And you'll keep your sentiments to yourself. If you can't manage that, we can revisit your employment." Dismissed, just like that. As Sarah left the study, she felt the weight of unseen eyes following her. Somewhere in the house, Lily was awake, bored, and waiting. Michael watched from his truck as a delivery van pulled up to the estate. He noted the timing, the guard rotation, the way cameras swept and paused. He did not storm the gates. He drove instead to a small cafe 2 blocks away and sat with a coffee he didn't drink, observing the neighborhood's rhythm. A woman walking a terrier, a gardener lighting a cigarette, a security guard stepping outside to take a call. By late morning, Michael had learned more than most people ever noticed. He had also learned one thing that tightened his jaw. There was a blind spot in the camera coverage along the east corridor, a blind spot placed with intention. He waited until noon before making his move. Sarah was in the laundry room when she sensed him before she saw him, the way you sense a storm before thunder. Michael stood in the doorway, rain-dark jacket over a simple shirt, his presence filling the narrow space without effort. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. "Mike," she whispered. He crossed the room in 3 steps and stopped himself inches away, careful not to touch her until she nodded. When he did, he wrapped his arms around her gently, as if she might shatter. He smelled of rain and road dust and something familiar that made her chest tighten. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes scanning with a soldier's instinct. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," she said automatically. Michael lifted her sleeve without asking. The bruises were ugly, finger-shaped, unmistakable. His jaw flexed once. He did not swear. He did not raise his voice. He simply lowered her sleeve again, hands steady. "Where's the dog?" he asked. Sarah led him to the small storage room. Lucky raised his head at the sound of footsteps, tail giving a cautious wag. Michael crouched, his large frame folding with surprising gentleness. He let the dog sniff his hand first, then stroked behind his ears. Lucky leaned into the touch, a low whine escaping his chest. "He didn't do anything wrong," Sarah said quietly. "None of us did." Michael nodded. "I know." That afternoon, Lily Whitmore found her day less entertaining than usual. Sarah moved differently now, not defiant, but not shrinking either. When Lily brushed past her in the hallway, there was no flinch. It irritated her more than fear ever had. "Still here?" Lily remarked lazily. "I thought my father made himself clear." Sarah met her gaze, calm and steady. "He did." Lily smirked, but something in Sarah's eyes unsettled her, as if the woman she'd dragged across the floor had not stayed where she was put. Upstairs, Michael sat with a man named Thomas Reed, a security technician in his early 30s with nervous hands and a conscience that had been rubbed raw. Reed was lean, dark-haired, with tired eyes, and the posture of someone used to apologizing. Michael had found him not through force, but through patience and the quiet pressure of truth. "They told me to angle the cameras," Reed admitted, voice low. "Just that hallway. Said it was for privacy." "Privacy for who?" Michael asked. Reed swallowed. "Not the staff." By evening, Michael had copies of footage Reed was never meant to keep. Partial angles, audio fragments. Enough to show intent, if not yet the full truth. As night fell, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, Lucky's head resting against her thigh. She watched Michael check the window, the door, the hallway beyond, the way he once checked tents and perimeters in places with no names. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "I know how you are about getting involved." Michael paused, then looked at her fully. "I'm already involved." From the far end of the house came the sound of laughter, glasses clinking, music swelling. Another gathering, another chance for Lily to perform. Michael's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. A single sentence. "You should take your sister and leave while you still can." Michael showed the message to Sarah. She stared at it, then at him. Somewhere above them, a door opened. Footsteps crossed marble. Lucky lifted his head, ears flattening, a low growl forming in his chest. Crystal light washed the Whitmore estate in a soft gold glow as evening settled, the kind of glow meant to suggest safety, success, and good intentions. Cars lined the circular drive like obedient servants, and inside, the house breathed with the low murmur of power, voices trained to sound relaxed while weighing other people's futures. Tonight's guest list was deliberate. Financiers, donors, board members, and a handful of men and women whose signatures could quietly end careers or rescue them. This was not a party, it was a court. Sarah Carter moved along the perimeter with a silver tray balanced against her palm, tall and composed in her pressed uniform. She looked the same to anyone who glanced quickly, dark hair tied low, slender frame, calm posture, but inside her chest, her heart kept a careful rhythm, steadying itself the way it had learned to do after loss. She did not belong in this room, and everyone knew it. That was precisely why she had been kept in sight. Michael Carter stood near a column at the edge of the hall, indistinguishable from another quiet guest who preferred the shadows. At 40, he carried himself with the economy of someone who had learned that movement invited attention and attention invited trouble. Broad shoulders under a dark jacket, short hair touched with gray, a trimmed beard framing a face cut with clean, uncompromising lines. His eyes tracked the room without lingering, measuring distance, timing, intent. War had not hardened him against people, it had sharpened him to systems. He waited. The technology was already in place. Earlier that afternoon, a friend from a former life, someone who spoke in code and wore curiosity like armor, had slipped a device into the ballroom's sound system. It was small, silent, and patient. When the switch flipped, every word would have a witness. Not tonight. Not yet. Truth, Michael knew, worked best when it arrived exactly when denial felt safest. Lily Whitmore entered late because anticipation was her favorite accessory. She wore a pale dress that caught the light and let it slide away. Blonde hair loose, smile rehearsed. At 20, she had grown up surrounded by yeses and had mistaken them for love. Her eyes found Sarah immediately, flicking over her like a stain on polished glass. Richard Whitmore raised his glass for a toast. He looked every bit the benevolent patriarch. Silver hair, tailored suit, the practiced warmth of a man who believed his generosity absolved him. Applause rose on cue. Lily waited until the clapping faded. "If you'll excuse me," she said brightly, stepping forward. There's a small matter I'd like to clear up before we eat. Transparency is important, don't you think? She smiled toward the tables where the signatures sat, especially in a house like ours. The room leaned in. Sarah felt the shift, the invisible tightening that preceded spectacle. She kept her eyes forward, her hands steady. Lily turned, gesturing. Sarah, would you join us? I think everyone deserves to hear the truth. The walk across the floor felt longer than it was. Sarah moved anyway, each step deliberate. She stood where Lily indicated, beneath the chandelier, beneath the eyes. This young woman, Lily said, voice light, has been having trouble respecting boundaries. There was an incident earlier this week, an accusation of violence, and then theft. A ripple of murmurs. We value trust here, so I thought it best to address it openly. Sarah met Lily's gaze. She saw the hunger there, the thrill of control. She thought of marble against her cheek, of the dog's broken yelp, of how silence had nearly swallowed her whole. Before Lily could say more, a low sound cut through the room, a restrained growl. Lucky stood at the edge of the hall, golden fur brushed clean, bandage stark against his ear. He did not bare his teeth. He did not charge. He simply placed himself between Sarah and Lily, body tense, eyes fixed, a small trembling line drawn in defiance. The sound he made was not anger. It was warning. The room froze. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else gasped. A server dropped a fork. Get that animal out of here, Lily snapped, stepping back. Her mask slipped just enough for irritation to show. Michael moved. He did not hurry. He crossed the floor with the same calm he had used crossing hostile ground years ago, stopping beside Sarah, his presence firm and unmistakable. He placed a hand on Lucky's collar, steadying him, and then looked up. Don't touch my sister, he said, voice level and quiet, the kind of quiet that carries. This room has ears and eyes. A hush fell, heavy and sudden, like the air before a storm breaks. Conversations died mid-breath, heads turned. Michael faced the room, then Lily. You wanted an audience, he continued, unblinking. Be careful what you perform. Richard Whitmore stood abruptly. This is inappropriate, he said, smile strained. Security! Michael raised a single finger, not in threat, but in pause. Not yet. Phones were already out. The moment had tipped. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. She was no longer alone at the center of the floor. Lucky pressed against her leg, warm and solid, his growl fading as Michael's hand steadied him. Lily stared, color rising in her cheeks. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she said, voice sharp. Michael leaned in just enough for her to hear. I do, he replied, and I'm not finished. Across the room, the guests exchanged looks, curiosity edging toward concern. The polished lies had been interrupted. The stage lights were still on, but the script was slipping. At the far end of the hall, a door opened. Footsteps approached, drawn by the tension. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Michael glanced once at the chandelier, once at the sound system above them, then back to Lily. His phone vibrated in his pocket, unread. He didn't need to look to know the night had only begun. Lucky lifted his head again, ears flattening, a soft sound gathering in his throat. The room waited. The room did not erupt right away. It held, suspended between breath and consequence, as if the walls themselves were listening for permission to remember what they had seen. Crystal chandeliers burned steadily overhead, their light unblinking. Somewhere beyond the glass, the night pressed close, curious. Sarah Carter stood with her shoulders squared, tall and slim in her pressed uniform, dark hair bound low, a few shorter strands framing a face that carried both gentleness and resolve. Her skin, warm-toned and faintly marked by healing bruises beneath fabric, felt suddenly too visible beneath so many eyes. She kept her chin level. She had learned, after years of being overlooked, that dignity could be practiced like a craft. Michael Carter shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, the way men do who have spent years listening to rooms before acting in them. At 40, his face was cut with clean lines, beard trimmed close, eyes steady and pale, reflecting the chandeliers without giving anything back. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The hush was his ally. "Security," Richard Whitmore said again, louder now, authority sharpened by panic. He had stepped forward from the head of the table, silver hair immaculate, suit flawless, hands betraying him with a faint tremor. "This has gone far enough." Michael met his gaze. "It hasn't started yet." He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small, black remote. It looked ordinary, almost disappointing, the kind of object that might open a garage door or dim a lamp. He lifted it between two fingers, allowing the room to register it. "You invited people who understand contracts," Michael said evenly, eyes traveling over the guests, bankers, donors, a judge's spouse, a city councilman with a practiced smile. "You understand records. This house understands control. Tonight, control is on a delay." Lily Whitmore's expression flickered. She was still beautiful, still composed, but something brittle had crept into her eyes. "You're bluffing," she said, a laugh edging her voice. "You can't do anything here." Michael pressed the button. The sound system cleared its throat. At first it was only audio, the east corridor, faint footsteps, the soft scrape of shoes on marble. Lily's voice, casual, bored. "Don't touch it." A pause. The sudden, unmistakable sound of hair being yanked free. Sarah's breath leaving her lungs. The low, frightened yelp of a dog. A woman near the window gasped. Someone swore under their breath. Michael let the audio play just long enough for recognition to turn to understanding. Then he pressed the button again. The screens along the wall lit up. Not one angle, several. Partial views stitched together, timestamps aligned with ruthless patience. The blind spot was still there, a deliberate absence, but the before and after told their own story. Sarah stepping in, Lily advancing, Sarah falling, Lily standing over her, face twisted with amusement. The room exhaled all at once. Richard Whitmore went pale. "Turn that off," he said hoarsely. "This is private footage." Michael didn't look at him. "It was," he replied, "until it became evidence." Phones were already raised. A woman in pearls pressed her hand to her chest, eyes wet. A man at the far table shook his head, slowly, as if recalculating something that had once seemed certain. Lucky whimpered softly, the sound cutting through the tension like a thread. He pressed against Sarah's leg, warm and solid, golden fur catching the light. His bandaged ear stood out starkly, an unspoken testimony. Sarah knelt without thinking, one hand sinking into his coat, grounding herself in the simple truth of his weight and warmth. Lily stepped back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. "This is edited," she snapped. "You're manipulating." A new voice entered the room. "I recognize the time codes." All eyes turned. Thomas Reed stood near the side entrance, shoulders hunched, hands clasped together as if bracing for impact. He was in his early 30s, lean, dark-haired, with tired eyes that had seen too much compromise. He swallowed, then lifted his chin. "I worked the security systems," he said. "I was instructed to adjust the cameras, specific locations, specific hours." He glanced at Richard, then away. "I kept copies. I shouldn't have, but I did." A murmur swept the room, sharper now, edged with anger. Victor Hale moved forward instinctively, silver hair catching the light, his practiced calm cracking at the edges. "This is highly irregular," he said, palms raised. "Let's all take a breath." Michael turned to him. "Your breath is overdue," he said quietly. "Your signature authorized the changes." Hale's mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly like a man realizing he had been standing on a trap door. Claire Dawson pushed her way closer, phone held steady. She was in her 30s, auburn hair cut sharp at the jaw, eyes bright with the focus of someone who knew when a story had chosen her. "Mr. Whitmore," she called, voice clear, "would you like to respond to allegations of evidence tampering and assault?" Richard's composure shattered. "This is extortion," he said. "You think you can ruin us with theatrics?" Michael finally turned fully toward him. "No," he said. "I think you've already done the work." The audio shifted again, Lily's voice unmistakable. "Your staff. Know your place." The scrape. The laugh. Silence fell, heavy and final. Lily's face drained of color. "Stop," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could catch it. "Please." It was the first time anyone in the room had heard that word from her. Security guards hovered uncertainly, caught between instruction and instinct. Orders were whispered and retracted. No one wanted to be the one who touched this now. Sarah rose slowly, Lucky at her side. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence, unbowed, unashamed, answered questions no statement could. Michael glanced at his phone. The message from earlier glowed on the screen. "End this now, or the dog disappears." He lifted the phone, held it up for the nearest camera, then met Lily's. Morning came without ceremony. The Whitmore estate, once loud with power and polished certainty, sat quiet under a pale sky, as if the night had rinsed it clean and left the questions behind. Report vans lingered at the gates, engines idling, but inside the house there was only the soft hum of systems and the sound of people learning how to be careful. Sarah Carter woke before the light fully reached the windows. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands folded, listening to Lucky's steady breathing. The dog lay curled at her feet, golden fur catching the dawn, bandage clean and snug around his ear. He was young, still awkward in his limbs, still trusting enough to believe that warmth meant safety, but something in him had shifted. His eyes opened when Sarah moved, tail thumping once, certain. The house had not broken him. Sarah dressed slowly, choosing clothes that were her own for the first time in years. She was tall and slim, her posture straightened not by pride, but by relief. Her dark hair fell loose to her shoulders, revealing the tender scalp beneath where hair had been torn away. The bruises on her arms had faded to faint shadows. They would leave, she knew. The memory would not. But memory, she had learned, did not get to make every decision. Michael Carter waited in the kitchen, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. In daylight, he looked less like an instrument of consequence and more like a man who had carried too much for too long. His beard was trimmed close, jaw strong, eyes pale and thoughtful. The war had given him a habit of scanning rooms, but it had also taught him when to stand still and let others speak. Last night had been about noise. Today was about aftermath. Sirens came and went. Lawyers arrived with briefcases and careful faces. Statements were made. Phones rang until batteries died. By noon, the Whitmore name was everywhere, stripped of its quiet authority and exposed to the same scrutiny it had once wielded. The family retreated behind closed doors, no longer hosts, but subjects. Claire Dawson stood near the gate, auburn hair pulled back, notebook full. She watched Sarah leave the house with Lucky trotting beside her, leash loose. "Miss Carter?" she called gently, not pushing. "Anything you want to say?" Sarah paused. She considered the cameras, the microphones, the old instinct to shrink. Then she looked down at Lucky, who gazed back up at her as if the answer were simple. "I want people to know this wasn't bravery," Sarah said quietly. "It was a choice, and choices can be learned." She walked on. By afternoon, arrangements were made. Sarah would not return to the Whitmore estate. She had no desire to. Instead, she stood in the sun outside a modest building with peeling paint and a hand-lettered sign, Harbor Paws Rescue. The director, Helen Moore, met her at the door. Helen was in her early 60s, sturdy and warm-eyed, gray hair pulled into a practical braid. She shook Sarah's hand with the confidence of someone who had rebuilt more than one life. "We're not fancy," Helen said, smiling, "but we're honest, and the dogs eat better than I do." Sarah laughed, a sound she hadn't made in days. It surprised her. Lucky sniffed the air, ears lifting, tail wagging as other dogs barked in greeting. The shelter smelled of soap, fur, and hope that had learned how to be patient. Helen knelt, examining Lucky's bandage with practiced hands. "He's going to be fine," she said. "If you'd like to stay on, we could use someone with your calm." Sarah didn't answer right away. She watched Lucky greet a smaller dog, gentle and curious. "I'd like that," she said finally. Michael waited outside, leaning against his truck, the afternoon sun tracing the lines of his face. He watched Sarah sign paperwork, watched Lucky disappear into a yard of wagging tails, watched his sister step into a place where her presence did not need to be explained. They drove away together later, windows down, silence comfortable between them. Michael had spent years believing his usefulness lived in confrontation. Today, usefulness looked quieter. It looked like making space. Weeks passed. The case unfolded with the steady patience of truth. There were settlements, resignations, charges that arrived without spectacle. The fixers learned that proximity to power was not immunity. The cameras that once looked away were cataloged, corrected, and archived. Sarah settled into a rhythm at Harbor Paws. She learned names, habits, small victories. She learned that healing often came in increments too small for headlines. Lucky grew stronger, his ear healing cleanly. He learned the yard, the routine, the sound of Sarah's footsteps. He learned that when night came, it did not always bring harm. Michael stayed longer than he had planned. He helped repair a fence, fixed a leaky sink, drove donations from places that had watched the story and decided to help instead of comment. The war did not leave him, but it loosened its grip. There were mornings he woke without scanning exits. There were nights he slept through the dark. One afternoon, Sarah placed a small plaque near the shelter's entrance. It read, "You are safe here." She stood back, hands on her hips, considering it. "Too much?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "Just enough." On a clear evening, they walked together along a quiet street. The sun dipped low, stretching shadows across the pavement. Lucky trotted between them, leash slack, head high. He stopped once, looked back, and then continued, as if checking they were still there. They paused at the corner, watching the light fade. Sarah slipped her arm through Michael's. "You didn't turn me into a symbol," she said softly. "Thank you." Michael looked at her, then at the dog, then at the sky. "You were never a symbol," he said. "You were always the point." The shadows lengthened, 3 of them now, moving forward together. There was no marble beneath their feet, no chandeliers overhead, only the ordinary ground, solid and forgiving, and the quiet understanding that some battles end not with applause, but with the simple permission to keep living. Sometimes the miracle doesn't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a choice to protect the weak, to tell the truth, or to stand up when silence feels safer. God works through ordinary people who refuse to look away. In a world that often rewards cruelty, choosing compassion becomes an act of faith. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that light still breaks through the darkest rooms, and that no act of kindness is ever unseen. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and give you courage in your own quiet battles. If you believe miracles still happen, share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel so we can continue spreading stories of faith, justice, and grace together. May God watch over every one of you.